We hear the word authoritarian thrown around so much in the news lately, and it's usually charged with a lot of heavy emotion. But today, we're actually going to strip all that away and just look at the hard data. Let's dive into this explainer and break down the actual mechanical structure of authoritarian leadership. We're going to see exactly how it works in business theory, and then look at how those exact same mechanics are currently playing out on the global stage. Which brings up a pretty provocative question. Can an authoritarian leader actually be good for an organization? I know, it sounds a bit counterintuitive. But to understand this objectively, we really have to look past our initial reactions and analyze the raw mechanics of high control leadership. We need to figure out why some organizations intentionally choose this style and look at the pretty steep price they often pay for it.
So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. What is authoritarian leadership? 2. Traits, pros, and cons. 3. Authoritarians, past and present. 4. The global backsliding trend. 5. Executive overreach and action. And 6. The final verdict. All right, let's jump right into section 1. What is authoritarian leadership? Basically, at its very core, it's a command and control model. Unlike democratic or participative styles, where the whole goal is consensus and collaboration, this is a model where the leader strictly controls the flow of information. They drive outcomes entirely through a system of punishments and rewards. The leader is the absolute sole decision maker. They centralize all the power to ensure their vision is executed exactly as dictated, and they leave pretty much zero discretion to the team. Moving right along to section 2, traits, pros, and cons. When you look at the core characteristics, it paints a very specific picture. By keeping all the power to themselves, these leaders inherently shut down outside input. In fact, our sources note that they frequently surround themselves with yes men and actually harbor deep trust issues regarding their own colleagues. They view them as potential challengers instead of collaborators. This creates an incredibly structured, rigid working environment. Because the leader demands complete compliance, there's literally zero space for out-of-the-box thinking. Sometimes, even poor communication is used intentionally as a tool, because keeping people just a little bit in the dark ensures they'll follow orders blindly without questioning the bigger picture. So you might be wondering, why would anyone actually choose this? Well, there are definite pros. You get insanely rapid decision-making because you don't have to wait for a committee to agree. That leads to increased short-term productivity and unmatched efficiency, especially during a crisis. But it comes at a huge structural cost. The cons show a really high probability of employee revolt, severe workplace insecurity, weakened overall morality, and just a total suppression of creativity. It's essentially trading long-term organizational health for short-term control. Let's turn to section 3, authoritarians, past and present. What's really fascinating is that this leadership style isn't always a permanent fixture. If you look back at history, figures like Abraham Lincoln actually utilized some pretty dictatorial authoritarian traits out of sheer necessity during the Civil War, well before he evolved into a great democratic leader. On the flip side, our curated sources point to modern political figures like Donald Trump in the United States and Viktor Orban in Hungary as contemporary examples of this high-control style in action right now, actively centralizing power to push their agendas through. Now, let's explore section 4, the global backsliding trend. According to the incredibly comprehensive 2026 V-Dem Democracy Report, the whole center of gravity for global governance has shifted heavily toward authoritarianism. Literally, nearly a quarter of the world's nations are actively autocratizing right now. We are witnessing a major transition, where large, highly influential nations are actually moving away from liberal democratic principles and fully embracing the exact command and control structures we just talked about. Political scientists are actually calling this the third wave of autocratization. You can see the steep downward trajectories on the Liberal Democracy Index for several nations. And it's not just happening in developing nations either. Historically stable Western democracies are going through absolutely unprecedented systemic regressions. Just to put some hard data to this trend, researchers highlight that the United States saw its Liberal Democracy Index score plummet by an astonishing 24% in a single year. That insanely rapid decline dropped the U.S. to 51st place globally, putting it behind literally all other G7 nations in these metrics. The V-Dem Institute described the sheer speed of this dismantling as completely unprecedented in modern history. So how are leaders actually pulling this off? That brings us to section 5, executive overreach in action. This stuff rarely happens through sudden dramatic military coups anymore. Instead, modern leaders centralize power through a very mechanical, step-by-step process called executive aggrandizement. They systematically dismantle checks and balances using completely legal and administrative tools. They target the media to control the narrative, they undermine the courts, bypass the legislature using unilateral orders, and purge the civil service to install loyalists. It is literally the business theory of removing dissenters, just applied to a whole nation-state.
Let's look at an empirical example of this civil service politicization. In the United States, the administration reinstated the Schedule F policy, which basically reclassified 8,000 senior career officials as at-will employees. This completely stripped them of their standard civil service due process rights. Now, proponents argue this improves bureaucratic efficiency and makes the system more accountable to the elected president. But critics, they note it removes statutory protections, effectively allowing for the mass dismissal of nonpartisan experts just to ensure strict, unquestioning compliance.
We're also seeing the suppression of dissenting voices happening in other Western democracies. Over in Australia, military whistleblower David McBride was recently sentenced to nearly 6 years in prison after he leaked documents to the media exposing credible evidence of war crimes. Transparency International Australia called the sentencing a dark day for democracy. They noted that aggressively punishing whistleblowers creates a massive chilling effect, ensuring that wrongdoing stays hidden and authority goes completely unchallenged. But here's the thing. Hungary proves that this process of executive aggrandizement isn't always permanent. After 16 years of institutional capture under Viktor Orban, we're talking gerrymandering, media control, attacks on civil society, the whole 9 yards. A recent election delivered a massive shock. In April 2026, Péter Magyar's Tisza party actually won a supermajority on a promise to restore the rule of law. This really proves that even in an electoral autocracy where the playing field is heavily skewed against you, mobilized voters can absolutely reverse course. And there's actually some broader good news in the data too. 18 nations worldwide are currently democratizing. Countries like Brazil and Poland are actively making improvements on key indicators like freedom of expression and media independence. It's solid proof that with active civil defense and institutional resilience, the slide into authoritarianism can be stopped and even reversed. Let's bring this all together in Section 6, the final verdict. What's genuinely kind of mind-blowing is discovering how neatly these corporate mechanics map right onto global political shifts. The objective data shows that the defining traits of authoritarian business theory align absolutely perfectly with modern political tactics. Think about it. Centralized control in the office becomes executive aggrandizement in government. Suppressing dissent looks exactly like silencing whistleblowers and the media. The desire for highly structured rules mirrors the politicization of civil service through things like Schedule F. And prioritizing efficient crisis management, that manifests as sweeping unilateral executive orders. Which brings us right back to the core trade-off of the authoritarian model. Yes, centralized control offers really fast decisions and undeniable efficiency. But as governments across North America, Europe, and Australia increasingly adopt these high-control tools in the name of efficiency, we really have to ask ourselves, at what point does the structural damage to our institutions, the loss of civil liberties, and the total erosion of trust actually outweigh those short-term gains? I'm going to leave you with that provocative thought to chew on as you watch these shifts unfold on the global stage. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.